Okay, so today we're going to talk a little bit about imagery. And we have, I mean, it's not like this is the first time we've ever had images, okay? But I tried to pick poems that definitely had some, that had some sort of metaphorical meaning or even allegorical meaning. But I know like some of the poems we've had so far, like The Raven, for instance, had a lot of different elements in it that were symbolic of something else that even the raven himself and his word, nevermore, what does that mean? But imagery is dealing not just with metaphor or simile or something like that, but it's dealing specifically with images. Now, do you remember the very, very short epigram that was about people's faces? It was in a city in the metro, and it was people's faces, and then it compared them to petals on a wet black bough. Do you remember that poem? Okay, you remember that one? And so essentially, and that particular poem, although it's also an epigram, is what's called an imagist poem. And so, in fact, its author is an imagist. And it was a movement really in the early 20th century towards making poetry it's not like it has to say some huge deep something, but it needs to show us some image. And most haiku, for instance, the 3-line poems, you've probably practiced with that. Most haiku are imagist poems because their whole point is not to say some deep profound something, but to show us an actual like image. And it could be, of course, it's going to be mostly visual, but it could include other elements of the senses. So it could include something, how cold something is, or it could include movement, or it could include sound and even smell. So it's not like it has to be just visual. It's not like a television, but usually it starts with an image. And in these poems, I specifically picked ones that have an image, but those images actually mean something. They're significant. Now it's funny because how many of you have both of you read this poem before? The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost? Or was this new for you? Okay, so Haley, you had read it before. Okay, so Andrea, you did not. Okay, so I'm going to go from, it's actually a very commonly quoted poem. It's an extremely famous poem. People have all sorts of interpretations about what the poem means, but I'm going to start you, if you do already know, or even if it's been taught to you, often when we watch, it's of course the big image in it is a road that forks. So, you can go left or you can go right. And that's kind of what he's talking about. And everybody takes it as extremely metaphorical. Well, this is the like the roads in life, and you can only travel one path and you have to choose. And of course you have to choose, and this is where we get to the overall interpretation. You have to take the road less traveled, right? The one that everybody else, isn't taking. They're taking, the masses are taking this path. You have to take the odd path. And so that's going to make all the difference. Okay. So that's what people think that this poem's about. But let me tell you a story. So essentially, Robert Frost wrote this poem for a friend. And he and the friend, I don't know if you probably aren't old enough to do this, but I've had a lot of walking partners. I like to walk in the neighborhood. Well, this friend walked in the neighborhood, but Robert Frost lived kind of out in a rural area, rural roads, and they would follow all these dirt paths everywhere. And so his friend, he would go, they always wanted to go on different paths and go, take different routes and things like that. But his friend, if he would go and take one path, he'd be upset that he didn't get to take the other path. And, part of the walk would be spent with him wondering what would have been found on that other path, if he'd taken that instead. And so Robert Frost actually wrote this poem as a kind of commentary on that. And he does extend it to make it so that it's a metaphor for life's choices, that you're going to make choices. I mean, you guys are actually you know, you're about to make a lot of choices. You know, if because you guys are seniors, and aren't you seniors? You guys are seniors. Um, but as seniors, you're about to go to, choose a college. You're about to choose a major, and you might change your mind, but for the most part, you're probably going to go in a certain field. You're about to choose, in a few more years, you'll choose where you're going to work and what kind of a job are you going to have. You're going to choose where you're going to live. And some of it will depend, but there are all these choices. Probably within 10 years, you're going to have chosen a spouse. You might even have chosen to have kids. So there are a lot of choices that will happen in the coming years. But the truth is your entire life, there will be choices and paths to take. Okay. And so Robert Frost really is talking about both the actual path that he takes with his friend, and he's talking about life choices. So he really does, it does have a double meaning. It does significantly mean much more than just the image itself. But then let's look at the actual images in this poem, and we'll figure out what he probably means. Okay. Now the truth is the other point of view, that, oh, just take the road, not the road less traveled. It could be, but that's not what Frost intended. But should you just go with the flow and do what everybody else is doing? No, that's not really a good guide for life anyway. So it's better for you to take the path that you feel most important. You go in the place where you feel called to go. You choose what you think most fits you. That's what's important, is making your own choice and not being swayed by what everybody else is doing. So Frost would absolutely agree with that. But let's look at what he's actually saying, okay? So we have the image, right? Two roads diverged in yellow wood. So yellow is, fall. That just means all the trees' leaves have turned yellow. And he says, and of course now he's taken on the I persona. So the speaker isn't necessarily Frost. He may even be speaking for his friend who really wants to go on both paths. But he says, he goes, and sorry, I could not travel both. So he's looking at one path, looking at the other path, and he's going, dang, I'd really like to go on both of them. But he says, I'm sorry I could not travel both and be one traveler. He'd have to like cut himself in pieces to split up. And so, and then he says, long I stood and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. So he really tries to look as far as he can down one path. Then he takes the other path as just as fair. He's like, oh, this one's just as good. And he actually walks it. But then he says, and having perhaps the better claim because it was grassy and wanted wear. So he says, well, I took this other path because, it seems grassier and it's not as worn down. Okay. But then he says, and this is the key to, wait a second, what's going on? Maybe he doesn't mean what we think he does. He says, though as for that, the passing there had worn them really about the same. In other words, he says, oh, well, this one looks grassier. Nah, they're probably the same. He admits, I don't know that that one's really the less traveled path. And then he adds further mist to it. He says, and both that morning equally lay in leaves no step had trodden black. So in other words, they were both covered with leaves that morning anyway, so I didn't know which one. It's almost like, when he says leaves no step had trodden black. What does that mean? What do you guys think it means? Mhm. What happens to, obviously he's in a yellow wood, so the leaves are, it's fall, so the leaves are falling, right? And he's there probably early in the morning because it says both, and both that morning. What's happened overnight? Right. And they fell off the tree. And so he looks down one path and there's a bunch of leaves still yellow. What happens when we step on the leaves? Right. They get crumpled up. If it's muddy on the road, and because remember he was walking on dirt roads. If it's muddy on the road, then they get all squishy and wet. And eventually, all of if they keep disintegrating, if you keep, I don't know, what's that? They're essentially degrading, and they will turn dark till everything's just brownish. But he even says, he goes, they were leaves no step had trodden black. So he says not nobody had walked on it. You guys, and you probably haven't. Have either of you seen snow? Like really blanket someplace? I used to live in several different snowy places. I used to live near Chicago, and snow is like a constant there. Okay, well, what's the coolest part of snow is not that it's cold, because that's just too cold. But the coolest part of snow is when it snowed and no one's been on the ground, because you look out from your window or whatever, and it's just this blanket, this poofy blanket of white. And when the sun comes out, it's all sparkly and everything. As soon as somebody starts stepping in it, you get footprints everywhere, and it kind of breaks up the pretty. It's just not as pretty once people start walking all over it. And as people walk on it, it gets darker and darker and darker and brown and black. All the pristine white stuff is over. Well, the same thing happens with leaves. You keep stepping on them, especially in a road, and they get mushed. And they're just, ugh, they're not pretty anymore. So he's saying that morning, all these leaves had fallen in the middle of the night on both sides, and no one had walked on them yet. So he could not tell, looking down one road, then looking down the other road, he couldn't tell which one was really trodden less than the other, because they were both covered with leaves. So this is a case where you have the image, and the image does mean something. Obviously, if one side had all these leaves stepped all over, and they'd already been bruised and browned up and black, then we'd know, even in the middle of the night, people were taking that road. But that's not the case. Both of them are pristine. They're both covered just with fresh leaves that have fallen from the trees, bright and yellow. And so he doesn't know which one was the right choice, which one was the one everybody wasn't doing. He doesn't know where the pack is going and where that he's diverging from that path. Okay. So, but we know he takes the second path. He looks down the first side, goes, and takes the second side. Now, he doesn't even say if he's going left or right. He just says, there's the first path. And then he takes the second and thinks maybe it was grassier and wanted wear, but he's really not sure, because it seems like they were worn about the same, and they were even more muddled because they were covered with leaves. So the truth is, when you have a decision, though, to make, is it always clear what your decision should be? No, no. In fact, usually your decisions are rough. I mean, if they were an easy decision, you wouldn't have to mull over them. But sometimes your decisions are really hard. Sometimes both options seem really good, or both alternatives aren't so great, and you're really, you feel lukewarm about both of them. It may be too that you feel pressure, from one group in your, like your family or something, to choose one way, and then you have pressure from like your friends or your boyfriend or girlfriend type stuff. Your significant other may have other pressures. It may be that your grandparents disagree with your parents and they're all fighting about it. One thinks that you should take one path, one thinks that you should take the other path, and you don't want to take either path. The truth is adulting is hard, and often choices, you have to choose blind, and that's what he's talking about. Like sometimes you look at one alternative and go, it seems pretty good. Then you look at the other alternative and wow, that looks pretty good too, and you have to just pick. And so, and that gets really hard. It's actually, psychologically, we know this, it's extremely stressful. even if you're choosing between two really good things. Like if you have two job offers, well, which one do you pick? Because the truth is even after an interview, you don't necessarily know everything about that job. Maybe you're thinking, do I live in a big city or do I live in a small town the rest of my life? Well, the truth is both have advantages and disadvantages. And you may be more aware about the advantages or disadvantages of living in a small town than you do a big city or vice versa. So it's hard to know what to pick because you don't know how it's going to turn out. And that's the truth. Even if you pick something you think you'll really like, you don't know that it's going to end up successful. You don't know that you won't have to switch to a different path because it's just not working. Things don't always pan out. So that's the problem. He says, okay, well, I just don't know. It both looked about the same, but he did make a choice. He chose the second path. And then he says, I kept the first for another day. Okay, so he's like, oh, I'll try that path later. Okay, and now we're getting into the metaphor. And we're really looking at the significance, not just of the image for those two actual real roads, but we're looking at the imagery. If you make one choice, he says, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. In other words, you tend to live linearly, like you'll make a choice and branch in from a fork. You'll branch over to one in one direction. And then the next choice you make is going to be from that branch. You don't backtrack and then go the other direction. You continue on that way and then it forks again and you choose and you branch off that way. So the likelihood is you'll never come back and have this same choice to make. You'll never be able to undo whatever choice you've made. It's a choice. It's kind of like, okay, if you choose to have kids, well, once you're pregnant, you got kids. And then you can't unchoose to have children. I mean, you can, but I highly don't recommend it. Because then those poor kids, you can put them up for adoption, I guess, but it's just not a choice people make. They choose to have kids and they keep their kids, and they try to make do with that choice. They can't suddenly not have children. That's not how it goes. If you get married and you find out you're married to the wrong person, you can't just go back and act like you were never married and it never happened. I mean, there's always something that gets changed in your life based upon these choices. These are big choices. So he says, knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. But, and that's the choice for all of us. We make a choice, we branch off, we make more choices that keep going in that sort of direction. But then he says, this is the most important to ends of all. He says, I shall be telling this with a sigh somewhere ages and ages hence. So when he's an old dude, two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. So he's saying when he's an old person, he'll go back, look back on that choice, and he'll say, I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. So he's going to reminisce, and he won't regret his decision. He'll instead justify it through some means. So are there times when we admit we've made a mistake? Yes, but we have to fall hard for that to be a mistake. Like people may say, I made a mistake to get married or when I did, or made a mistake, I chose the wrong field because it's just not, I've known people because I went into teaching and I got my bachelor's degree in teaching. Well, the very last semester in a teaching degree, I did mine next to last semester, but most students last semester is student teaching. And there are people every semester who go out and do 12 weeks of student teaching and discover that they do not want to be a teacher and they hate it. And so they end up with a degree, they're finished with a degree they never want to use. And that's scary. And that's the absolute nightmare is that you get a degree and by the time you finish the degree, you don't want to do that job anymore. You're all done. Hopefully you figure it out in the first semester or two and go, no, I don't want to be an architect. And then you switch gears so that you can do something else. So, we want to feel like it's the right decision. But there are plenty of people who even choose to go into the field. They'll be like, well, I got my MD. They even went through and became a doctor. And they don't like it, but at least it makes, it pays the bills. And so they continue with it, even if they don't like the job. And they do that their whole life. So I hope that doesn't happen for you guys. I actually picked my job and I really like my job. So yay, it worked. But the truth is what he's saying is no matter what, when you get old and stuff, you'll look back and go, well, I'm glad I made that choice. I'm not gonna, I mean, if you regret, everything's a regret. Oh, I wish I hadn't, and I wish I hadn't, and that's sad. And you don't want to certainly go on with your life wishing or wondering what it would have been like if you'd picked differently. And would you be happier? That's just sad. That's really sad. And so essentially what he's saying is not that he picked the right path. He's saying that when he looks back on his life, he's not going to regret it. He's going to go, even if he intended when he went to that, even if he couldn't tell the difference between the two paths and which one was right, even if he knew he couldn't go back and choose a different path, he's still at the end of his life not going to sit there and regret what he didn't choose. He's going to say, I'm so glad I made that choice. That's made all, I took the two roads diverged, and I took the one less traveled by, and that's made all the difference. The truth is, he'll say this, but is it true? Did he take the one less traveled by? Truly, no. But why is it important for him to say this now, as an older person, having made that choice a billion years ago? I feel like I've lived a billion years sometimes. How does it matter that he looks back on his choice and says, I'm really glad I made that choice to marry so and so, or to, I'm so glad I had my 4 children, or I'm so glad I became a teacher, or I'm so glad, you know, what's the alternative? If he doesn't say, I'm really glad I made that choice and that has made all the difference. If he doesn't say it, what does he say instead? Or what might he say? Yeah, and that's no good, because the truth is, you can't go back. He says, knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. And so he can't go back and choose differently. So he's going to regret it his entire life. That's awful. That's not where we want to be. And the truth is too, and I mean, I don't know how you guys feel about it, but I've always felt as if I'm not in control of everything. And so I have to be at peace that the way things turn out is the way they're supposed to for me. And so if I applied for some job, a long time ago, which I've applied for jobs and didn't even get an interview. I've applied for jobs and got interviews and didn't get the job. And I've been disappointed, but it turns out okay. In the end, we go somewhere else and I have a better job than I ever expected. And so, and sometimes what we envision for ourselves is just the tip of the iceberg, in our future. When I was a freshman, no, I was a sophomore. I was part of, I think it was a government class, American government, and he had us write letters to ourselves in 5 years to essentially predicting where will we be. And where I predicted wasn't nearly as awesome as where I ended up. And so I really sold myself short. And so why in the world would I regret that? But the truth is if you go through life with big regrets, that's a hard thing to deal with. And especially when you can't really know that you made a good choice or not. and you're not sure that the other choice would have panned out. It's hard to go through and wish that you'd done something else because there's no way to undo it. And so that's really sad. So no, he's going to say, to his grandkids or whatever, his kids and grandkids, whew, it's a good thing I made that choice and took the road less, the one less traveled by, because that's made all the difference to my life. It's made my life as as good as I could imagine. It's much better to do that. Now, notice what the title is. It's not the road less traveled. So, that's made all the difference. It's called the road not taken. And so this poem is not about the choice he made that was awesome. It's about the choice he didn't make. And he will never know what his life would have been like if he'd made it. Now, what makes us not make choices? Like, why do we not, like, if we're choosing 2 different degrees or something, what would make us choose the safer of the 2 degrees? That where we know we'll get a job. Like, I became an English teacher, but my minor was actually in theater. If I had chosen to go to New York City and become an actor, and I'm laughing because that's not, no, that's not going to happen. But if I'd done that, my life would be radically different. And actually, I even after I finished my bachelor's, I took an aptitude test, and it was a test about career choices. What career should I be? And it said I should either be a teacher or an actor, which I think is really fascinating. But I didn't make that choice. Now, I could certainly go, and I'm just talking about my own self, but I could certainly, think, oh man, every time I watch the Tony Awards or something, I could think, man, I could be there and I could have been an actress. But that's not what I do. Instead, I'm very happy with my choice. I'm kind of like this guy. I mean, it's probably the road more traveled by. More people become teachers than actors, but to me, it still made a difference. I have a different family life than I would have if I'd chosen that field. Honestly, I could have failed at it. I could have been miserably bad, and I would have had an easier time. I think I would have been able to get more parts in New York than I could have in Hollywood, because there's no way they wouldn't have hired me in Hollywood. But tons of people go and fail, and they just become waiters and waitresses up there, because they can't get an acting job, and it requires a lot of skill that I certainly didn't have at that time. So there's a question though, am I going to regret that I didn't make that choice, or am I going to be happy with the choice I've got? And in my case, I'm happy with the choice I've got. Now, you two, since I've talked about mine a little bit, what are you choosing in the next year? What kinds of choices are you going to have to make? And which ones are giving you the hardest time? Yeah, is it about like, okay, so you have, Andrea, you said major. With Haley, are you talking about like which college you're going to, or what you're going to major in? And even within a major, like my son is in computer science, but he doesn't know what he wants to do with it. He doesn't know, does he want to go into IT? Does he want to do computer engineering? Does he want, he just, what kind of job do I want once I get out? I've known people who were English majors like me. I knew one guy who went straight from there to law school, and now he's a big lawyer in Oklahoma City. But he was an English major in my field, actually. He was English and criminal justice. Well, and the truth is, it's overwhelming because everybody's like, make your decision now. Come on, you got to choose. You got to choose. Even when my son applied to VSU, he had to put down what his major was going to be. And once you change it, a lot of the advisors will go, no, 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 you don't want to change your major, because then you suddenly some of the stuff you've taken won't count anymore. And then you have to take other classes. And so you're always afraid, oh no, but that's going to take longer or something like that. And are you afraid? Do you have in the back of your mind, fear that if you go to the wrong college and it won't be a fit, or if you major in something that you're going to be miserable and you're going to figure out, wait, I don't want to do that. Or maybe you just don't even know what you want to do. Because I mean, I'm way older than y'all, but I'm still wondering what I want to be when I grow up. Maybe I'll just not grow up. I'll just keep doing this job and not grow up. Well, and a lot of people will say, if you say, oh, I want to, like, even when I said I wanted to major in English, people would say, well, what are you going to do with that? And even with teaching, I said I wanted to be a teacher, and they were like, no, you don't. Nobody wants to be a teacher. And they were wrong, but I had to kind of argue that out of my head because it made me second guess everything. So, but the decisions, and these are decisions that will probably carry you through much of your life. Even things like my daughter chose to go away to college. Now she's actually here at Wiregrass, and her coming back actually changed my son's decision. He wanted to go to Georgia Tech, and then he decided he didn't want to go away because it didn't work well for her. So everybody, I mean, do you tend to do that where you're like, if somebody who graduated last year or the year before, and they come back to visit or something from their college, or they've come back because they didn't like college, or they didn't like where they were going and now they're going somewhere else. Did you ask them, does that make you more terrified, I guess, that people go, oh no, it didn't work out for me? There's so much. Do you feel like there could be so much that could go wrong and then you're just in trouble? Yeah. So, and that adds to the stress. That's the thing, is it makes it so hard to make decisions. It's one thing to make a decision when you're calm and, and you're just walking through a wood randomly. It's another to make a decision that will have a bearing on for the many, many, I mean, even decades of your life. And certainly that it will affect the next 4 years or more, depending on what you're wanting to go into. So yeah, it's stressful. And yet, I guess he's adding a little bit. He's saying, well, and you can't go back. Now you can. People do change majors. People do shift gears. We actually re-educate a lot of people. They come here after, they were in a factory or something. They didn't go to college. Then they come here and they get a degree in, cybersecurity or something, or criminal justice, or, I mean, commercial truck driving. So the truth is there are many opportunities you'll have to choose something else, but you'll never be in this place again. And what he's suggesting, and I think he wrote it for his friend for that reason, enjoy the trail. Whatever you choose, just go and walk it and see where it leads. And then instead of regretting, just be happy with where it's gotten you, and know that in some ways it's still built. I mean, you're still going to grow up. You're going to still mature. There are going to be things that you learn from that path that you wouldn't learn if you didn't take it. And so even if I'd been weird and decided to go out and be go to New York City and try to be an actor, even if I failed at it, I would learn something, or a lot of some things about myself and about what I like and about what's important. So we still learn from all of that. And I guess that's kind of where he's going. He wants his friend not to stress over it and think about the paths he can't take. We do, and it's human nature to do though. But at the same time, ideally, we want to live our lives as if we made the right choice. And it's no good regretting what you can't change. That's a terrible place to be. Far better to find happiness where you are than wish that you were somewhere else. So it's interesting. I mean, I've actually played. If you can find a recording of Robert Frost reading this poem, you'll hear more of his tone come through. And at the end, I mean, he doesn't just say, oh, we'll see, I took the one less traveled by, and that's, no, he's saying, I'm going to say this, but I don't know if it's true. I mean, so, and I've heard him talk about it. He's written essays about this going, this is what it really means because people weren't really getting the point. Now, I'm sure people who watch this video, because you guys are the ones in here, but they're not. And it may be that some people are like, nah, that's not what it means. But this will probably be on the test. And it doesn't mean, take the path no one's taking. That's not what the point of the road not taken is. It's don't regret the road you don't take. Go with your decisions and just live your life as fully as possible. Don't regret the choices you don't make. And the truth is, are some paths findable again? Yes. I mean, think of how many books or movies you've seen where somebody makes the wrong choice and marries the wrong person. And then they go back and they realize, maybe they're to an ex-girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever, and they go back home or something and they realize that they made a big mistake and they can start over. But it's not going to be the same relationship. If anything, it's more mature if they go back to somebody that they had kind of turned down before. So, can you undo some of the stuff you've done? Yeah. Can you recover if you go, if you kind of stray? Yeah. Is all lost if you pick the wrong major? Nope. All I can say, you guys, and this is my only piece of advice here, is if you go to college and you're majoring in something and you realize you hate it, don't wait. Don't wait until you're a senior. And even if people are like, no, stick with it. If you really don't like it from the beginning, skip. Go to something else. Go back to your advisor and say, look, this is not working. Take a test that helps you kind of figure out career paths that that suit your aptitude. What are you good at and what do you like? And then find a different path. And don't be afraid to do that because it's okay. I knew I wanted to be an English teacher when I was in 5th grade. Most people don't know that. So, I mean, I think the average freshman before they graduate with their degree changes majors 8 times. That's average. So it is highly, I mean, I don't know if already you guys have thought in the past, oh, I want to be a whatever. Well, and then now there's no way you would be that. My son, he wanted to be a cop for the longest time. And there's no way he would be a cop now. But he really wanted to be for like 3 or 4 years. He was just absolutely sure he was going to be a policeman. And now he's changed his mind for good reasons. So I'm glad he did. But you can do that too. You can change your mind. So just know that. Even with my son, he's like, I don't know that I want to stay in computer science. Good. You change it to what you need it to be. My daughter's on her 4th major already, and that's okay because she will find her path. And your path is yours. It's not anybody else's. So I wish you a lot of luck too, because honestly, just working hard, you can find what you need, but be thinking about it as you go. And is this the right thing for you to do? Because it's okay to say, no, this isn't working and let's fix it. It's really okay. That's all my advice well, we don't really have enough time to start something new. Do you guys have any questions or any comments about this particular poem? You can also look, we didn't look at rhyme scheme and things like that, but Mr. Frost, Robert Frost says that you cannot, writing poetry without rhyme is like playing tennis without a net. So his poems rhyme. And you can see it's like wood, it's like A, B, A, B, all the way through. So that each sings this 5 lines, and it's A, B. Was that it's C, D, C, C, D, like that. And he usually writes also in iambic tetrameter, which is 4 feet of iamb. So it's unstressed like that. Most. So he says, and both that morning equally lay. In leaves no step had trodden black. So ba 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 ba. Four beats of iambic. He also wrote stopping by woods on a snowy evening. Stopping woods, which I really like. It's probably my favorite of his poems, but it's metaphorical too, and it has imagery, but it's very iambic tetrameter. So, any other questions though? Any other comments? If not, I will see you next week. And I'll post this. Hopefully I'll get it posted by this afternoon. And then look for the other ones on, especially the one on the poetry essay, because you have two options very similar to the one you had for the prose essay, but I walk through how to quote poetry and cite it in an essay. And I talk a little bit about the format, like MLA format and stuff like that in that video as well. But it's actually marked, it's going to be labeled poetry essay. So make sure you at least check that one out. But any of the poems that you have trouble with, make sure you watch the video on them, because I'll walk through and talk about the images and talk about the meaning and kind of set it all up. So you can, hopefully those will help if you watch those videos. Okay. If you don't have any questions, I will see you later. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Haley. Bye.